Thanks, Ariane, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to introducing this topic of Keystone leadership with you. And as Ariane said, we will go through a few slides, and then we'll have a breakout and talk about it, and then we'll come back and do the same thing again. So I hope that you'll find it a very engaging and a very thought-inspiring presentation. So I'm going to go straight into screen sharing with you. And just make sure I get the right one. Okay, you got that one up on your screen? My first slide. Good. So the first thing where I want to go with this is that wilderness and the wild is a great learning lab in itself. And the reason that I know that is because I've spent a lifetime on safari, whether it's when I grew up in Zimbabwe or ever since when I've gone back. I've always gone back and enjoyed the safari environment and the lifestyle and the whole aspect of safari. And the most important thing about safari is this: every single day on every single safari, you learn something new. It's like a constantly changing environment where you're seeing something in a different way, or you're seeing something that strikes you, and it comes to you in a way that is inspiring and is also hugely important to our own personal growth. And it was because of that I've started Tasimba, because I wanted to share that learning and to reconnect us as leaders and other leaders who we could bring with us, with nature and with ourselves, because it is such a great learning environment. Look, when a great physicist, when Albert Einstein says something like this, you know it's a great learning environment. And when he says, look deep into nature and then you'll understand everything better. That's what nature is about. So let me talk about the pathway that led us to Keystone leadership. I have two parallel passions: the wilderness and wildlife and getting out on safari and the African bush. And my other passion is leadership. And the two of them for me are combined into Tasimba, but increasingly I'm seeing how the two are interrelated and overlapping with each other. My own career was simply, I came through a business career, and I was a CEO of 3 different companies in my time. And since then, I've been doing a lot of executive coaching and leadership development, and have been a KDVI associate for several years now. And the work that I've been doing in the last couple of years in particular, with the coaching work, the Leadership for the Future project, which several of us took on to create a new paradigm of leadership and what it needs to be post-COVID. And as Oriane mentioned, the Quo Vadis Leadership Reflection Circles, where we're talking and based our conversations around Manfred Ketzer-Free's book, Quo Vadis. Those things have helped really gel and bring together into this learning lab. So I want to talk about the building blocks. There are 3 words that will recur throughout this presentation. And the 3 words are inspiration, purpose, and impact. And let me just first show you how we see, and I see, the linkage between those 3. Inspiration, by what it is, fuels passion, because it's out of inspiration that passion arises. Passion itself then drives your purpose. And purpose, when you act to execute your purpose, produces impact. So that's the linkage of those 3 words. I want to talk then about how we get to inspiration, because it's often inflection points in our lives that create inspiration. And inflection points being anything that is a major life-changing event for us. Often, hopefully, it is something which is really, it's a positive change. It could be graduation. It could be the birth of your first child. It could be a major new appointment in your career. It could be some other accomplishment by the family or whatever, but something that changes your career. It can also be a traumatic experience, such as a near-death experience for yourself, or a major health issue, or losing a close relative or a friend. But whatever it is a life changer. It changes your perspectives, it changes your paradigms. And because it has that changing impact, it challenges us to think and or act differently. COVID was a classic inflection point. COVID upset everything in our lives, everything that we'd taken for granted, everything that was our normal. COVID upset it. COVID changed everything. And as a result, as we're coming out of it, it has generated some inspiration and some change paradigms, but some inspiration to do things differently. A deeply immersive safari is another of those inflection points. What happens is that people get inspired by the experience of a really deep immersion in safari. Let me show you how that works. Inspiration from the wild really is in two aspects: what we experience and what we feel. So what we experience is a vast, open, empty wilderness, wildlife teeming everywhere, space, sky that is a vast big sky and horizon that goes from forever. And what happens is after a day or two, we start realizing just how small we really are in the scope of things, in this vast, open, empty wilderness with no little sign of humanity. That's when we realize how small we are. And it's a very good experience to have. The natural habitat, when we see wildlife just doing their thing, they're living their own lives, and they have a very simple purpose in their lives, and they don't try and imagine or think of themselves outside of their purpose. They simply get on with doing what they're here to do. And their behaviors inside their own species and with other species start to create for us a real sense of humility, a sense of this has been going on for millennia. And for them, it is simple. It is the way they know. It's the only thing they know. Another experience is being out of our comfort zone. You know, in our home environment, normally, we're very comfortable with that. We know we've got everything the way we know it and we expect it, and everything is sort of orderly and everything is in our comfort zone. You get out into the wild and you suddenly have this awareness. Wow, there's a lot going on out here that I have no clue about. And that knowing what we don't know is a huge opening and to people being able to learn and accept new things. We're not very good at learning when we're in our comfort zone. We're very good at it when we're out of our comfort zone. And the final piece that is sort of the experience is the longer you're there, the more we realize this is where we as humankind came from. This is our roots. This is what it was when we finally emerged as human beings. And with that, you feel a stronger reconnection with nature. As one good friend of mine says, there's no such thing as human nature. There is only nature, and we are a part of it. Look, here's some wilderness, the sort of wilderness I'm talking about. A beautiful open grassland area. The grass is rich and green and lush and nutritious for all the grazing animals. The forest is there right in the distance, and another huge storm is brewing to drench the land and to create more nutritious grazing for wildlife. But the only sign of humanity is this little lone track which is leading off into the bush. Or this, we're stopped in a vehicle and a herd of 200, 300 buffalo walk right by in front of the vehicle, and they're on their way to a water hole. But we are in their space. We're visitors in their space. And that's one of the impacts that comes to us is this is their world. And we are visitors. And so we learn from their world rather than assuming that we know all about it. Equally, you can get a very personal inspiration, like these two women who were both with us on one of our safaris. And it was a very hot day. And we were watching hundreds, literally hundreds of elephants make their way slowly in a long parade past in front of the camp and go to a nearby waterhole. And then this one family, led by the matriarch, she's the big one at the back, came right over. And these two guests were sitting with their feet in the water, and they had this incredible personal experience of being that close to those gentle giants, 20 feet away, because that's the length of the pool, that close to them. And as they said to us after, I've never in my life experienced anything like that, particularly when you could feel the water being sucked out of the pool by having your toes in the water. Or this shot that I took on just a few weeks ago when we were on safari. A beautiful golden sunset. Two elephants had decided they wanted to cross the Zambezi River. They swam through the deep channel, and now they were on the shallower side. And here in the sunset, it's as if they're raising their trunks in salute to the end of another amazing day in their lives and to a golden sunset. And it's time that we look at that and say, we appreciate and celebrate the end of some of our accomplishments too, and the end of a day like that. So I want to give you just a thought about what this inspiration really is about. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. ask yourself what makes you come alive, because that's inspiration. And then go out and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So let me talk a little bit then about some of the inspiration you get from specific animal behaviors that we see. First of all, just understand this: we are totally disconnected when we're on safari. There's no distractions. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no cell phone, there's no TV. And so we are really present in the moment that we're in, an enormously impactful feeling you have. We have the time to watch, to listen, to feel, and to reflect on what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And as I said at the beginning, the more we watch, the more we learn every single day. So this deep engagement leads to self-discovery. We start looking at ourselves differently. We start looking at ourselves in our role, who we are, what's important to us, the perspectives we have on our life and on what we want the rest of our life to look like. It revitalizes what's really important to us. And in doing so, it inspires a passion to do something differently. Not necessarily a passion about conservation, but the fact that we're able to step away from our normal life and look at ourselves through a different lens inspires a passion to do something differently when we get back home. So here's a story that illustrates some of the learnings you can get. Here's 8 roan antelope, and you're saying, yeah, but that's a lion in front of them. Why aren't they running? This is lesson 1. They're not running because of this. Wild animals, in particular prey animals, will always get warnings when there's a predator around. It'll be a bird, or it'll be a baboon, something will give them a warning sign, and then they will look. And unlike us, who as soon as the slightest sign of a warning, hit the panic button and run, they watch, because to them, the most precious commodity they've got is their energy. They may need it, and when they do need it, they want to have plenty of it to be able to escape a predator. There's no need, therefore, to burn energy if there's no threat. And what they figured out, there was no threat. Why? Because they'd seen this lion coming from quite a ways away and realized that she's limping quite heavily. If she's limping, she can't run. If she can't run, we're safe. So they just watch her walk by. What's the other half of the story? How come she's limping? Well, she's limping because she was in a hunt with the rest of her pride to try to bring down a buffalo, and buffalo are hard to bring down. They are big, strong, mean, and ornery. And in the course of that tussle, the buffalo trod on her foot and broke the bones in her foot. So now she was out of that hunt, and nor could she run. Therefore, nor could she hunt with the pride in future. And if you don't hunt with the pride, you don't get to eat with the pride. In fact, you're kicked out. So she and her 1-year-old cub were kicked out. And what they had to do was learn. She didn't know anything but pride hunting. Now she had to learn how to solo hunt. So she learned, lie in the tall grass and wait for an unsuspecting prey animal to come by and just spring on it. Well, that's the way leopards hunt. Leopards are solitary. So she taught herself how to hunt like a leopard. That's her only choice. It was resilience and adaptability that got her to survive, and that allowed her to bring her 1-year-old cub into adulthood. Here's another example of resilience and of things we learned from the wild. Elephants love water. They need water. They drink about 40 gallons a day. So when elephants are looking for water, they get plenty of it during the wet season. But in the long dry season, which can go 8 months, and if it's a hot dry season as well, then the water holes dry up. And when the water holes dry up, that's when the elephants need to do something, and need to really do something different. So the matriarch will lead, as she's doing here, lead her family on what may be a 30, 40, 50-mile walk to a water hole she remembers will still have water in a severe drought. And she remembers it because her matriarch, maybe 20 or 25 years ago, led her when she was either a juvenile or a young adult to that same water hole. So there's a resilience thing there. We need water. We have to do something about it. We will do it, whatever it takes. I will lead my family to that survival to get that water. Here's another example of how wildlife care about each other. This is a female baboon. She's sitting at the foot of a leadwood tree. And when baboons get in any way threatened or that, where do they go? Straight up a tree, because that's their refuge. That's their safe place. Female baboons, when they have young infants, the infants will clutch onto the female's chest. I want to show you now what happens, because this is no infant. This is a juvenile. And why this one is still in her chest, I don't know. But the point is, the baby is heavy. So she decides she's going to go up the tree. Look at the size of that baby clutching onto her. Now that's almost doubling her weight. And the tree's got very little bark and very difficult handholds. So she's struggling the whole way. Now watch what happens here. Right there comes a hand, and there's other baboons in the tree pulling her up to safety in the tree. And we watched that, and that's our bit of video, but it was an example of how wildlife go about and help each other. So I want to link the two things we've been talking about here, which is passion and purpose, because passion comes, the inspiration that creates passion and lead into purpose. And here's a quote that helps me always understand the connection. If you can't figure out your purpose, figure out your passion, for your passion will lead you right into your purpose. So what I'd like to do is to go now into a breakout, and I'd like you to think about some of the stuff we've talked about here in inspiration, fueling passion. And the question for you is, what's your passion? And then in what ways does your passion drive your purpose? Okay, so what's your passion? And in what ways does your passion drive your purpose? Talk about that in your groups, which Steph will put you into now. And we'll take about 12 minutes, Steph, for this conversation. Mm-hmm. Thanks. All right. So thanks, everyone. We got a few minutes, about 8 minutes. So what I'd like to know is what did you experience in that conversation, and were there any learnings that came out of it? I can't see all of your hands, so if you can just either wave or put your hand up, and I will call on you.
Catherine has a hand up.
Okay.
Catherine,
who was that?
Catherine Tomlinson.
Okay, Catherine.
Hi, Hugh.
Hi.
What was quite interesting in our discussion was the kind of reactions around the word passion. And I found that quite interesting in the sense that, because I can relate to that, but I almost feel like thinking about a passion almost puts a bit of pressure on you. Feel like, well, what if I haven't got a passion? What does that say about me? And so I thought that was an interesting aspect of our conversation in our group.
And did people struggle with that, Catherine?
No, I think in the end everybody did come, but sometimes I think maybe your passions aren't necessarily always fully aligned or in an obvious way with what you do, with your sense of purpose, maybe professionally. But
yeah,
that's a bigger question, isn't it?
Yeah. Who else? As Paul.
Yeah, I was again reflecting very quickly that it seemed that our passions didn't happen in isolation, that they were kind of reflection of our interaction with a system, whether it be with a client or with a professor or with a group of creative people. That seemed to be somehow a collective activity or a collective experience.
Yeah. And I saw Stefan, was that your hand went up?
Yeah, so we had a great conversation. It was fun because we in a way, the four of us aligned quite nicely, actually, and a surprise for me about climate and sustainability being really an alignment in our passion in our group. And then we had a great I guess, inspiration from Paul that just came back from a trip with you, Hugh, and it was very enlightening about his experience with a tribe and seeing how it was influencing his way of thinking and the format. So we are all like thinking now of maybe signing with you, Hugh, because it seems to be an exciting trip here.
Well, the purpose was to talk about Keystone leadership, but we use our trip as an example of how to get into that. So thank you.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And it was, I think it was nicely positioned that, you can do something like this, a trip like this, but when you're in a crowd of people with the same kind of alignment, there's a lot of cross learning happening, and I think that's true.
I think that's a very valid point as well, and that is that what we have found on every single one of our trips is the people who choose to come with us are like-minded because they're curious, because they're serial learners, because they actually always do want to learn more. And the consequence of that is that when we get into the wild, they are learning both individually, but also because they're sharing it, and so it's a collective learning that's actually enhancing the level of learning for everyone. They're seeing how others perceive the same incident or the same situation that we were in. So it has that value being in a group rather than being singly on safari.
Right.
Yeah, Oriane?
It's interesting. I'm just bouncing off Catherine's comment. There's something about existential angst and human nature combined that, I mean, I certainly have felt existential angst throughout the course of my life at different moments of feeling, moments really in the flow, really feeling connected to what I'm doing. And then moments where I feel, yeah, maybe this says something very strong about me, but where I feel like I'm not sure where I'm headed or what I'm doing. And that definitely causes a sense of dissatisfaction or restlessness, or yeah. And it sort of goes a little bit in waves until I find something that feels right, where I can really put my energy. But I feel frustrated at those moments of wrangling with this existential angst. And I don't, you can't see into the minds of the animals that are wandering through nature, but I have a fantasy that they don't wrangle with that same kind of angst.
I think their wrangling is primarily around two issues. I mean, they have a simple purpose, and that is survive and breed, because that's the survival of the species, and that's about it. You can pretty much put down all of their behaviors into one or both of those categories, and which is very simple, and it just makes us think. We complicate things so much because we're just so smart. We have the capacity to be able to complicate things.
Aidan has his hand up, Hugh.
Oh, Aidan?
Hey, Hugh. Sorry, if I may, could I ask a question just around purpose and leadership?
Yeah.
To my mind, people who have clarity on their purpose is quite attractive for other humans to follow. Do you have any thoughts on that? People who have demonstrated great success, or is it an absolute necessity? If you don't have that, you won't bring the people with you.
I believe it is, Aidan, because I think that one of the things that creates followership is that the leader, it has a sense of purpose or direction or energy about him or her that what makes people want to follow. So I think that you're onto one of the building blocks of leadership, which is having a strong purpose, which gives people something to collectively come together around and follow. So I do believe it's a fundamental to leadership as well, and which is why we build it into the building blocks we talk about here.
Provided the purpose is noble.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Provided the purpose is noble.
Well, yeah, that provided it's noble, but at the same time, the leadership of some of the leadership which we regard as being some of the most unrespectable, or no, worse than that, some of the worst leadership in the world, nevertheless still has a purpose. And unfortunately, what happens is the people can be gathered underneath that purpose. But I agree with your point completely. Okay, any other thoughts before we move on?
Hugh.
Yes, Paul?
That last comment I have been reflecting on, because our last stop after Tsimba was in Zimbabwe was Rwanda. And the genocide there in 1994 has really made me think, and they're a united country right now. But I'm reading a book that was interviewed large number of the perpetrators, the actual people who did the killing, the Hutus, and how they got to that point of killing their neighbors and such. And it's again, it's depressing, but also enlightening to study how good they were. Many of them were college educated leaders in their communities, mayors and other people of position, and how they could come to believe that it was actually the right thing to do, or the necessary, or even submit to kill their neighbors, and even sometimes family members. It's leadership still goes back to, they were passionate about an idea, and it does not necessarily have to be a noble purpose, but there was a purpose there of unity by wiping out one side that they were convinced was the source of problems. So I think there was a learning in there that leadership can be either way.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul, and it can be for that purpose can be, as you say, for the wrong, what we would consider a wrong purpose, but nevertheless a purpose it is. Okay, I'm going to pick up where we left off and pick this up again. And just a reminder of the building blocks we talked about: inspiration, purpose, and impact, and the relationship between them. Inspiration fueling passion, passion driving purpose, and purpose then being the acting to execute and to implement purpose being what produces impact. Let's just talk about purpose then for a second, because that's the next one of the next part of the building block. And that purpose really comes down to what's really important to me. What is it that drives me? What is it that I, right now is the most important thing for me? And our purpose does change and can change frequently, or not frequently, but on several occasions through our life, depending on where we are in our life and depending where we are in the course of our existence. And for example, for many people, retirement is their purpose. And then they get to retirement, and then what? Then they need a new purpose, because what are they living for now? That they worked for retirement, and now what are they living for? So it's, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And put differently, what outcomes do I want to achieve? And that's where we start talking about impact, because impact then is how our actions affect others. And a quote I want to give you from Dr. Ian McCallum, who is a doctor, a psychiatrist, a poet, an author, a wildlife guide, a conservationist, and has been one of our visiting experts and visiting guests on Tosimba for several safaris. He says, ecologically and literally, our human footprint has been heavy on this planet. Now that's impact, because it's the way we have acted and the way we have behaved that has been a heavy footprint on the planet. We can talk about that in climate, we can talk about it in sustainability, we can talk about it in all of the impact we have had. But where I want to go with that is that we need to remember that everything we do has impact. And that especially applies to leaders, because leaders are being watched and observed the whole time by the followers. They're being watched for what they do, and that the impact they're having. And the impact that they have is either, and this is my personal theory, but is either going to contribute to and add to their leadership and that, or it's going to take away from that. But it doesn't leave it the same. The impact of their actions creates and is what is needed to continue to create followership. Like animals in the wild, therefore, we leave tracks. Now, our tracks may not be nearly as clearly observable as animal tracks. When we're doing tracking and when in the bush, you're dealing with a completely different thing than what we're talking about, but we nevertheless leave tracks. And what I'd like you to be thinking about then is, what are the tracks that you're leaving that others will choose to follow? Because that's a question that leaders should never, ever forget. And that is, what am I doing that will create impact on my followers? When we take our guests out on safari, one of the things we do is we leave camp, and then we park the vehicle way out in the bush, and we walk. And we walk where wildlife is and where wildlife has been. Everywhere we walk, we're picking up and seeing their tracks. Everything: elephants, antelope, zebra, giraffe, lion, hyena, whatever. We're seeing their tracks. But this experience of walking in the wild is an intensely alert experience for people because they're conscious of, I could be being watched and I have no idea by whom or where and whether or not that's a danger. So there's a consciousness that it creates about every step I take, everything I do is being watched when I'm in the bush like that, and I'm not even aware of it. And it applies in exactly the same way to our role in society or in business or in the community. Everything is being watched, the point I was making earlier. So I want to move from there onto this notion of the different species we have and keystone species in particular, because keystone species are unique in nature, and we're going to talk about them in humankind as well. Keystone species are those whose existence creates beneficial outcome for others in their ecosystem. And that ecosystem which would radically change if the species were not there. So you see from the old keystone, the big wedge of stone in the top of the arch, that's keystone is what's keeping the archway in place, even when there's no mortar, because it's putting pressure on all the other stones to stay together. And you take that keystone out and the arch collapses. So what's the most common keystone species that we have and you can possibly think of? And I would suggest bees. Bees are everywhere, and without bees, we would be in a lot of trouble. For food, for fruit, for flowers, for life, for so many things. Bees are a keystone species because they pollinate and therefore create growth of vegetation. I want to introduce you to a couple of other keystone species. This is a sea otter off the coast of California. Why is a sea otter a keystone species? Well, I'll tell you why. In the coastal shallows, kelp forests grow each year, and they grow tall to about from the surface of the floor of the ocean up to wherever the surface is, maybe 30, 40, 50 feet. And the kelp forests get to be a nursery for all the smallest of the ocean species, or all the young of the ocean species, because they're a place to hide, they're a place that shelters them from the predators. Every year when the kelp forest grows, if the sea urchins have taken over that seabed, and they breed like crazy, and if they take over the seabed, they prevent the kelp forest from growing. So if the kelp forest is not there, all of those species then are without shelter, and so it damages their outlook and the possibility of their survival. Fortunately, sea otters go down and they bring up, as this guy did, he brought up a mealtime of 5 sea urchins, and he's laying flat on his back, floating around in the water, munching on the sea urchins because that's his delicacy, that's the delight. So he is doing his part in reducing the sea urchins, which then allows the kelp forest. That makes him, in that regard, a keystone species. Here's another example, and for those who are not North American, I apologize, the second one from North America, but Yellowstone National Park and that whole of the Northwest the wolves were wiped out in the mid-1920s. And for 70 years or so, they just weren't there. In Yellowstone Park, what that meant that the elk population just absolutely ballooned. And in doing so, it meant that you had one species which is competing for the same food stock, the same vegetation. And that was actually changing the entire balance of vegetation in the park. What they liked to eat was being completely consumed, and other vegetation was growing in its place. And so it was changing the entire ecology of the park. In 1995, 12 wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone. There's now about 500 of them. And guess what? The elk population has come down and is now balanced. Because of that, the vegetation has recovered. And so now you've got birds coming back, you've got insects coming back, you've got beavers coming back to rebuild the dams that would recreate the waterways that got so tramped down by too many elk on it. So the wolves coming back was the presence and the return of a keystone species to keep that ecology in balance. Well, I guess you're going to guess where I'm going to go when we talk about what's Africa's keystone species. Nobody but these guys, the elephants. Why? Several reasons. First of all, elephants they're big enough. They make pathways through the tall grass and through the grasslands and also through the forest. And the saying always is, Wherever there's an elephant pathway, it's a pathway to water. So all the other animals use the elephant pathways as the game trails that lead them to the water as well. Why create a new path when the elephants have done it for you? Another thing that elephants do is they are both grazers and browsers, meaning that they can eat grass if there is any, or they will eat branches and leaves and trees if there's no grass. So they can do both. So they'll go around the edge of the forest and they will pull out saplings that are now starting to encroach the forest into the grassland, and they'll eat that. So what they're doing is preserving the boundaries of the forest so that it doesn't start to overrun the grassland and therefore damage the environment or the existence of great herds of the grazing animals. The other piece, or another piece of elephant keystone is this. They have the most inefficient digestive system you could possibly find. About 70% of the nutritional value of what they eat, and they eat for 16 hours a day, about 70% of the value of that, the nutritional value, goes right out the back door. That means that their dung is very, very rich in nutrients. Well, elephants also love to eat seeds. I don't think they even chew them for the most part, but they just love eating seeds, whether it's acacia seed pods or whether it's the palm seeds, not the coconuts, but palm trees that have seeds. They love those seeds. What happens is that these seeds get germinated as they go through their body in the 16 or 20-hour warm, moist oven, and the seeds germinate. Then they come out of the back in their own ball of ready-made moist manure. That creates the opportunity for one of those seeds to plant and to grow and to regrow into a tree. Elephants are called Africa's gardeners. One where they keep the grassland clear, the other where their dung and the seeds in it create the next growth of trees. That dung also gets to be very, very productive for others. Hornbills and guinea fowl will go through the dung looking for seeds. Baboons, you'll see baboons picking their way through it looking for seeds. You'll see all sorts of insects benefiting from it. Dung beetles themselves who need elephant dung, and they roll it up in a ball and then they go off and they lay an egg in it, and that gets to be where their larva hatches. All of these other species are dependent and are there and flourish because of elephants. Well, I need to ask you a question. Are humans a keystone species? Now you're probably thinking, well, heck yeah, I mean, we're the apex species. We are at the top of the very top of everything. Yeah, but are we a keystone species? Go back to the definition, whose existence creates a beneficial outcome for other species in the ecosystem. What do we do? How do we do that? What other species benefit from us? Okay, your dog. Well, your dog would soon become feral if we weren't here. And your cat already is. So there's nothing. No other species are dependent on us because we are here. That almost makes us the reverse of a keystone species. So the answer is no, we're not. But here's where I want to go with that, because we can become keystone leaders. And what is it that defines and distinguishes a keystone leader? Well, it's this. Because they are inspired, they dare to dream, they dare to have this inspiration, and they live it passionately. And because of that, they also live and lead purposefully. Come back to our connection of inspiration, passion, purpose. One of their other attributes is that they have always, keystone leaders have a very deeply committed care for others, just like our baboon and the helping and the being helped up the tree. They have the values, beliefs, and behaviors of the best leaders. And just like elephants, they create pathways for others to follow. It's their tracks. It's what they leave. It's the example they leave. It is what they create as being the pathways of life. In other words, keystone leaders are the embodiment of our inspiration, purpose, and impact building blocks. One of the best keystone leaders I can think of is someone like Jane Goodall, who has been the so good and so amazing in the conservation of chimpanzees. And here's what she writes. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Let me introduce you to a keystone leader. This is Dr. Moore-Angel Zimbiza. She's a Zimbabwean woman, grew up in a rural village, started to fall in love with nature, studied it, got an undergraduate degree, then went on and got her doctorate from Oxford University in lion behavior. And she was our guest at our most recent safari. And she just blew away our guests by her passion, by her commitment, by her leadership, by what it is she's committed to doing. She has understood and realized that there's this constant tussle between humans and animals when the human population increase pushes people closer to where the wildlife is being preserved in national parks or whatever. And this human-animal conflict is an issue right across Africa. And her take on that is that she has started her NGO, and its purpose is to help the communities survive so that they don't get oppressed by elephants coming out of the park and eating an entire crop of the family's crop, which is all that keeps them alive for the next 12 months, because that's their staple diet. Or lions that come out of the park and kill a goat so they get no milk, or worse, kill cattle, because cattle for the rural people is wealth. So she's doing things with the communities to help them to avoid, so that they don't try and shoot the elephants, or they don't try and poison the lions, so that they are giving and developing local and renewable and sustainable protection against that. One example, they take buffalo dung and cook it up in a pot with water and throw in a bunch of chilies as well, and mix up this porridge, which they then put out and bake in the sun. And then when it's nicely baked in a hard cake at night, they'll put one of those out and light it, and it'll smolder away. And guess what? No elephants. They hate the smell of chili in their nostrils and the trunk. I wanted to introduce you to a couple more Keystone leaders. That's Tendai Katai on the right and Mike Neone on the left. Both of them are professional wildlife guides in Zimbabwe. Both of them came out of simple, very, very poverty, rural villages in Africa. Both of them grew up and started to fall in love with nature and understand nature, because they were part of nature. They lived outside the whole time, and they were constantly learning about nature. They went their own paths up through the high school, and then they went in to learn a guide. In fact, Tendai was a guide on the Zambezi River, leading canoe trips down the river, 5-day canoe trips down the river. That was his occupation. Mike came in another way. He studied biology. So Mike knows every biological name of every plant you could possibly imagine, and then some. But these two guys are now pro guides. The qualifications they've had to go through to get to be pro guides are extremely challenging. Those qualifications have been in place for 20 years, since 1980, 42 years. Only 197 so far have ever made it to pro guide, and these are two of them. But why are they Keystone leaders? Well, because first of all, they have passion. In the morning, they're the first ones up, and they're the ones who are dying to get out to see what's happened overnight. What changed? What's new? What's happened? So they have this passion for wilderness and for the wildlife. Secondly, their purpose is to share as much as they can of that, so that their purpose is to enlighten and to inform and to help people who are their guests, their visitors, their tourists, help them see nature for the way they see it. And their impact is what you see when you realize the number of people who leave and who will talk about their guides in just complete awe and admiration for what they know and what great people they were and how they really opened our eyes to the bush. So Keystone leaders then also leave a legacy. Maya Angelou said this: if you're going to live, leave a legacy. Make a mark on the world that can't be erased. So legacy, we're not talking about the material things we leave behind. Let's face it, once you have died, all the material things now already start to belong to somebody else. So you only borrowed them for the time you lived. No, legacy is what we'll be remembered for. It's what people will talk about long after we're gone. It's the things that we leave and that gave lasting meaning to our lives. That's legacy. It's how we touched and benefited others. Here we go again. Beneficial outcome for others. The transcendence we have. So with that, I want to now move into another breakout and ask Steph to put you back in your breakout rooms. I think one room we are going to change, Steph, right? Where we had 5 in one and 3 in another. So we'll move someone from the 5 to the group of 5 to the group that only had 3 to balance that out. But here's the question for this breakout. What do you do or can you do to create a beneficial impact for others around you? Think about that, because that is the defining aspect of Keystone leadership. And what do you most want to be remembered for? It's a lot to talk about. Take another 12 minutes and have a good discussion on that. You're the only one coming back, Paul? You're on mute. You're on mute.
There was a button to return. I think I clicked it too soon.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope that was you had some interesting conversation. Be great to hear. How did you experience that question and the conversation, and then what did anybody learn? Hands up, anyone who would like to just report on your group. We'll try and catch the. Is that a hand up, Fred, or not?
Yeah, since you called me out, Hugh,
I did catch you out on that one.
We got into a pretty philosophical discussion about saying, is this about ego or not? And I like that, because you should be challenging that. And I'm not sure whether we came to a conclusion. I try to offer something by saying maybe we do have a responsibility to leave something positive. And so if we connect that with our own ego, that could be damaging. But can we leave our footprints? But that makes a difference for people. And so if we say we don't, I kind of say to myself, if I can make the difference by not getting in the way of other people's progress, that's the minimum I should be doing. But if I can not get in the way of people's progress, but help them to absolutely progress by just leaving my footprints behind, that's also great for me. Now that's that's kind of where I am on this whole thing. And you've got me over these last couple of weeks thinking a lot about this transcendence space, this legacy place. And what does that really mean? Is it you go write something, or you just have conversations with people, or you make space for people to think differently? And what do you do to do that? How do you actually leave a legacy without getting in people's way?
Yeah,
this is the big question.
Yeah, good question. Very good question. Thanks, Fred. Who else has something interesting that was in their conversation? Okay, Ariane?
I think one of the things we talked about was simply the act of listening and being able to give space or time to others.
Yeah, yeah. It's that focus. It's, again, I mean, what we're trying to do with this Keystone leadership thing is to make sure that the focus on benefiting others is a central part of what it is. And so in some ways it relates to servant leadership and to other concepts that in that part it's not new, but in relating it to the whole notion of Keystone, that we make a better outcome by doing what helps and what benefits others. Any other thoughts? Catherine, what about you?
No, I guess we went around in our group, we went around talking about what drove us. And I think what really came out for me is probably people's values. So in a way, it's kind of like your values and your view, your worldview, in many ways has a strong impact on how you impact others. So that was probably the takeaway I took from our group.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, we really are very close to the last thought on this, and I just want to I have really only one slide left, and so I'll just go back up there to get that one up. And the thought that I want to share with you is this. This is a photo of Xander, and Xander was Cecil the Lion's last male cub who had a pride of his own. Again, in the area that we go to, and Xander was, we had just the privilege of sitting by the side of a track like the one we showed you, and he was lying there because he'd been on patrolling his territory, and he just was needing a little rest. So he stopped there, and we were 6 or 7 feet from him, and every so often he'd look up and give us a photo up. Those amber eyes just staring at you, and you wonder what's behind all that. But at the same time, you know you're in the presence of just an absolutely unbelievably beautiful and powerful animal who is in his own space, is doing what he does because that's the only thing he knows what to do. And so he's clear on it. But I just wanted to share that photo and just leave you with this thought. May the wondrous learning lab of nature inspire you to become a Keystone leader. So thank you for your time here. Thank you for spending time with us on this topic. I hope we've given you some thought. I hope we've given you something to consider, something to think about, and something to talk about some more. Certainly for me, Keystone leadership is something which I truly believe is and can be part of the leadership that we aspire to individually and collectively. So thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate seeing all of you here. And have a great day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.